So welcome to the second extract of my novel Kiss from a Rose. This part talks about the actual amount of time it took for me to be diagnosed, which was the best part of 2 years. And this is a common problem I found amongst teenagers diagnosed with cancer. It often takes a long time for doctors and medical staff to realise that things might actually be a lot more serious than initially thought. So it's one of the main reasons I wanted to write the book, to raise a little bit of awareness about teen cancer. And it comes from the chapter As It Was in the Beginning, so I hope you enjoy. As we sat in a classroom in complete silence, I turned over the first page of the mock exam paper I was dreading the most. I really struggled with maths, but I had a good and supportive teacher, so I wanted to do both her and myself proud. I flicked through the rest of the paper, checking to make sure that it wasn't going to be a complete disaster, before turning back to the front page, breathing a small sigh of relief. Suddenly, a huge burst of pain seared through my stomach. I thought I was going to faint. The pain was so intense, I began sweating, and I could feel a pulse beating against the inside of my head. I doubled over, holding my tummy, praying that this time it would pass quickly. You see, it wasn't the first time this pain had struck me. I had been suffering from these severe stomach cramps for around 6 months. I'd been to see my GP countless times, and each visit saw him prescribe me stronger painkillers. In his infinite wisdom, he took the easy option of diagnosing pain as menstrual cramps, but I knew my body. I'd been having periods for a few years by then, and they never had been this bad. Each time I saw the doctor, I insisted that it had nothing to do with my periods. The pain was constant, not simply for 1 week of the month. It was such an intense pain that I physically wanted to rip my stomach out. I wanted to scream in agony. I wanted to punch and kick until somebody would listen. Every time I entered the doctor's surgery, I felt like I was screaming in the dark with no one to help me. And the one person who had the power to do anything for me was not only deaf to my cries, he was turning a blind eye to my suffering as well. He made me feel pathetic. He made me feel that I was complaining about something that every woman on the planet copes with every month for the majority of their lives. He made me feel like a silly little girl, taking up his valuable time with my trivial grumbling. So I tried to carry on with my life. My boyfriend and I decided to cool things down between us until after the exams. I said it was a good idea because, as well as my GCSEs, he had his A-levels to study for. And besides, we'd have many good times to look forward to once the stress and pressure of exams had passed. I soon completed my mocks and began preparing for the real thing. After being misdiagnosed at the GP surgery so many times, I began to believe that perhaps the cramps really were just bad period pains, and that I was going to have to live with the pain for the next 40 years. I thought I may as well get used to it and get on with it. But over time, the pain intensified even more, and it was constant, and though I was trying to live with it, I couldn't ignore it for much longer. The cramps would seize me throughout the days, and as my GCSEs were approaching, they were making it increasingly difficult for me to concentrate and retain information. Maths and science were not my strongest subjects at the best of times, but I was struggling to grasp new and simple concepts. As I felt I was falling behind, I began to lose interest in class, devoting all my attention and willpower trying to overcome the pain that was engulfing me. As well as my concentration, I gradually began losing my appetite too. Soon, I physically couldn't eat. Every time I attempted a meal, I felt full almost immediately. I remember one occasion my nan had prepared a full roast dinner for the whole family. Having worked hard all morning preparing a feast for us, all I could manage was literally a small roast potato before I had to dash to the loo to be sick. After a while, people around me began to think I had an eating disorder. It was true. I was losing a dramatic amount of weight, and fast, but it certainly wasn't through choice. I wanted to eat. I wanted to feel normal. I wanted to sit down and enjoy a complete meal with my family, but it was impossible for me. The thought of dinner and lunchtimes in the school canteen filled me with dread as I could hear the girls who were supposed to be my friends talking about me. They thought I wasn't eating in order to get attention. They thought I was being pathetic and self-absorbed. They couldn't have been more wrong. Sitting in the biology class, I heard my stomach roar. I just couldn't understand how I was obviously so hungry, yet felt so full all the time. Soon I could feel my teachers running out of patience with me too. I'm sure many of them also thought that my behaviour was a result of craving for attention. Attending an all-girls school, I think it's fair to say that all of us were very conscious of our appearance. Being slim and trim was at the top of everyone's list of priorities. But I was too skinny. At 5'4", my weight quickly dropped to 7 stone. In the meantime, my trips to the doctor's surgery became a frequent event. Each time he sent me away with bigger, stronger painkillers, each time throwing me a more irritated look as I left his office. After months of being turned away, not being able to eat, and walking around holding my stomach, I started to think that I must be going mad. If the doctor could find nothing wrong with me, there must have been nothing wrong. So what was going on in my head that was making me think I was in all this pain? I spent every lunchtime in the school's medical room, silently crying, wishing away the agony. One morning I was at the school canteen. It was coming to the end of the morning break, so everyone was finishing off their food and getting ready to head to the next class of the morning. There were 2 bells that rang at the end of each break. The first was to let you know that break was over. It told you to go to the loo and get any books or equipment that you might need for your next lesson from your locker. The second rang 5 minutes later and indicated that you should, by now, be in the classroom ready to start the lesson. My friends and I were sitting chatting at a table quite near the entrance door to the canteen as the first bell rang. We all stood up and gathered our things together. Suddenly the pain struck again, and I doubled over, clutching my tummy. I stood bent over the table, wincing in agony as the rest of the school bustled past me. There were 2 teachers on duty in the food hall that morning. One was the music teacher. But despite my love for music, my music teacher and I didn't see eye to eye too often. She was always making patronising and degrading comments to everyone, so when we weren't in the classroom, I avoided her as much as possible. As I held onto the edges of the table that morning, waiting for the pain to pass, the other teacher on duty came up to me and put his hand on my back and rubbed it. He looked at my music teacher, asking if it was period pains. "Supposedly," she replied. "Natasha, stop moaning and get out of the bloody way. You're blocking the whole canteen. Stop complaining and get to class." I couldn't even look up at her. I practically crawled out of the food hall to my next lesson. The pain was so intense. But now, along with the pain, I could feel a strange movement inside my tummy. Sometimes it was so violent I can only describe it as what I can imagine an expectant mother feels when her baby's kicking inside her. I was scared. I knew that something was very wrong, yet still no one was listening to me. Soon it became too much. Sitting in the medical room once again, I couldn't hold it in anymore, and I screamed. I screamed so loud until someone heard me, until someone really heard me, until someone helped me. I remember the head teacher running down the corridor, almost skidding into the medical room. Her name was Mrs. Hutchinson, and fantastic at her job, she wanted the best for all her pupils, but wasn't afraid to put us in our place when we needed it. The look on her face as she met me in the medical room that lunchtime was a mixture of fear, confusion and concern. She tried to calm me down, but I was in agony. I didn't want anyone to touch me. I didn't want anyone to hold me. I was sweating, crying and retching. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move with the pain. The school office called my mum. She was at work a good 40 minutes drive away, but it took her less than 20 minutes to get to me. She was working in a primary school in Sidcup as a nursery teacher at the time, so we would have had to find someone to look after her class before she even left her school. She got to me as quickly as she could, although to me it felt like hours. When she arrived, she burst through the front doors and grabbed me and rushed me to our local hospital, Queen Mary's in Sidcup. She later told me that the journey there was like being in a car with the girl from the film The Exorcist. I have no memory of the journey, but she often teases me as she recalls me screaming and swearing at her. Now, normally I wouldn't dream of speaking to my mum like this. I'd get a thick lip if I was that cheeky. But I think she made an exception on this occasion. As I was in so much pain, I was running a temperature, so I suddenly started taking my clothes off in the car as well. By the time we reached the hospital, I was exhausted, frightened, and practically naked. I was taken to a bed in the children's department in A&E of Queen Mary's and left lying there for a couple of hours until a doctor became free to examine me. Due to the pain and my description of movement within my tummy, the medical staff obviously assumed that I was pregnant. I was 15 and the school I attended, Townley Grammar, had a bit of a reputation. It was an all-girls school and we were collectively called the Townley Tarts by pupils in other schools in the area. General opinion was that we concentrated more on boys than our schoolwork, so my protests of not being pregnant fell on deaf ears. I tried to explain that unless this was the result of divine intercession and that this was a second immaculate conception, there was absolutely no way I could be pregnant. However, they went ahead with a pregnancy test, just to be safe. I remember my mum, Mary, telling me to just be honest. She told me that if I was pregnant, to just say so and we could deal with it together. I just started laughing. I was in absolute agony and couldn't believe no one was listening, but I could see how worried my mum was. In her eyes, being 15 and pregnant was not the life she had hoped for her daughter. But then at least there would have been an explanation for the pain. The medical team looking after me went on to carry out 5 further pregnancy tests, convinced that eventually one would show up positive and the pain I was in would prove to be the result of complications. However, just as I had told them countless times, as each test came back negative, they soon came around to the idea that actually I wasn't pregnant. So the experts once again diagnosed bad period pains. A gynaecologist made a quick visit. He didn't even examine me. He simply prescribed more painkillers and sent me home. The medication he gave me must have been quite strong, as it knocked me out for the rest of the afternoon and brought some much welcome rest. But I woke later in the evening to the sharp pain that was all too familiar to me. The effectiveness of the gynaecologist's painkillers quickly diminished, and once again, nothing was helping to numb the agony I was in. I continued going to school for the rest of the week. I tried so hard to attend all my classes and concentrate despite my extreme discomfort. However, by the end of the week, I was back in the medical room with the office staff again, frantically trying to get hold of my mum. As my head teacher came in to sit with me while my mum was on her way, I rocked on the edge of the bed to try and ease the pain. Looking back, I realised how much time she spent with me and how she was the only one in that school that really did believe that I was in pain. When many other teachers lost patience with me and accused me of being dramatic and seeking attention, she didn't. And when I look back at all those times she sat with me in that tiny room by the school office, I see the genuine helplessness in her eyes. As I left school to make yet another trip to the A&E department in Queen Mary's Hospital, she told my mum to refuse to leave until they found out exactly what was wrong. And that's exactly what Mum did. The hospital staff must have seen me coming. The moody teenager who couldn't cope with a few period pains was back and screaming the place down once again. My granddad also turned up, and with him my brother, Dominic, who had finished school for the day. My granddad had picked him up before coming to the hospital to see if I was all right. They both looked terrified. I was screaming, and again I was trying to take off as many layers of clothing as possible because I was so hot. Dominic tried to hold my hand, but I shook him away. He stood looking at me helplessly, the tears just streaming down his face. As I lay on the hospital bed in just my pants, tights and bra, my poor granddad ran around A&E desperately trying to get a nurse or a doctor to take the pain away and stop me from crying. This time they gave me no pregnancy tests, but they did give me an X-ray. The scan showed that I was extremely congested, so they suggested I took some strong laxatives and be on my way. But my mum could see that it was more than that. She wanted an explanation as to why I could be so congested that I could only manage a roast potato at dinner before running to the toilet to throw up. Why hadn't my system sorted itself out by now? It just wasn't normal. Surely there must have been something blocking my insides to make my condition so severe, but nobody had any answers for her. Instead, they formed a new theory as to what the problem was. I had been assigned a consultant in the A&E department, and he had requested the X-ray, for which I was grateful. But an X-ray can only show up so much. It doesn't provide a detailed image of the tissues and organs, and so it had missed the extent of the problem. He told my mum that he believed that I was in a certain amount of discomfort due to the congestion in my intestines. However, the intense pain I was complaining of, he believed, was simply in my head. He told her that I was attention-seeking and doing my best to get out of my upcoming GCSEs. He suggested that she take me home and administer some discipline around the house to ensure that I no longer persisted in such juvenile behaviour. He also advised that she take me to a psychologist, because if I wanted to get out of a few exams this badly, I clearly had some underlying behavioural problems. I lay on the hospital bed in the fetal position, clutching my stomach, listened to an educated professional telling me that I was going mad. Seeing me shake with the pain, a nurse brought over some gas and air. I grabbed hold of the mask, clutching it to my mouth as I closed my eyes and threw myself into darkness. I lay there, praying to die. In front of me I could see a skull and crossbones, a bit like on a Jolly Roger flag. But there was no sea, no ocean breeze, no boat to take me away from here. The skull and crossbones remained flying for a while. I thought if death was the only way to escape this agony, then I would welcome it with open arms. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt or fear. Listening to the doctor, my mum was infuriated. She knew how hard I had worked at school and the determination I had shown not to let myself fall behind despite the pain I was in, and how badly I wanted to succeed and do well. But as always, she retained her dignity, thanked the professional for his advice, and agreed to act upon it. However, before we left, she tactfully asked that he give me an ultrasound scan, just to put her mind at rest. To this day, I have no idea what made her ask for that specific scan. I also have no idea why he agreed, to shut me up perhaps, to finally be able to close my file. But in that moment, Mum saved my life.